Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 7, Episode 17, Masks. This was the winner of a poll I ran on my channel for what my next Star Trek video will be about. But if you voted for one of the other options, don't worry, because there's going to be videos for those soon enough. And I would have done masks eventually anyway, because it was also suggested to me by my friend Christy, who, now that I'm thinking about it, maybe likes to torture me just as much as my friend Luke. I'm joking, but let's face it, this episode is famously horrendous. And before I rewatched it for this video, I wondered if it's actually as bad as its reputation. And with the exception of a few unintentionally hilarious moments, I think it is just as bad as its reputation. So, thank yous to Christy. I appreciate it. And of course, I'm kidding around because I would have definitely done a video on this eventually. Regardless of the quality of it, it's become kind of a cornerstone of Next Generation. There's just so many memes from this episode, and people have done video essays about how ridiculous it is. But I think the worst thing about it is that it's actually kind of boring. The ridiculousness is the only thing about it that makes it somewhat entertaining. You know, seeing Data take on these multiple personalities is kind of the only thing that keeps you watching it, at least in my opinion. And I think it kind of feels very much like a Season 1 episode. If you added a few lines of dialogue from Picard about how great humanity is, it would definitely come off just like a really bad Season 1 episode. But either way, I think we should just get into it. The episode opens up on the Enterprise in a children's art class. Everyone is sculpting various things with clay, and Data is taking part in the class, which is frankly baffling. I mean, he's an artist in his own right already, but he's basically here to learn how to express himself artistically. And Troi is also here. She's here to be an art critic, essentially. And there's a kid who has sculpted this monstrosity. I mean, if you had to guess what this thing is, would you be able to do it? He says it's a bird. And if you gave me 100 guesses, I don't think I would have said bird. I mean, from the back, maybe I'm crazy, it looks like a dick wearing an overcoat. Does it not? And why does it have ball bearings on what are apparently supposed to be wings? Why does this bird have balls on its wings? I would fail this kid immediately. And it's pretty tough to fail art class. And then I would tell his parents that he just made a dick bird in my class right now. And then I would retire from teaching art class because obviously I can't do it. And Data's sculpture is a perfectly formed tablet, or pad, as they say in Star Trek. And it's to scale as well. But Troi doesn't like it. She tells Data that he has to work on his imagination. She basically wants something a little bit more abstract. So she asks Data to sculpt music. And Data asks how he's supposed to produce a sound with clay. And I'll tell you how. Just ball up the clay and throw it in Troy's face, and that will hopefully make a satisfying musical sound. Because she just encouraged whatever that dickbird disaster was, but now she's giving Data shit about his perfectly sculpted pad? I don't get it. But Data decides not to throw the clay in Troy's face. What he does do is sculpt a musical note. She wanted music, and she got it. And then they both get called to the bridge. The captain's log reveals that they've been tracking a mysterious rogue comet. There's no previous record of it on any charts, and it's apparently been en route for 87 million years. No idea how they know that when they have no record of it, but okay. There's a flash of light on the bridge, and there's some kind of distortion in the comet's inner core. They begin scanning it, and the scan will be completed in 39 hours, which is a horrifically long time for a scan. I mean, what program are they using to scan this comet? Norton antivirus? Why is it taking so long? And then it jumps to Troy's quarters where she's talking with Crusher. And there's a strange object on the table. Troi has no idea where it came from, and then they just leave. I mean, this is season 7. You guys have seen a lot of strange shit. Could you at least scan it with a tricorder or report it to somebody before you fuck off and just leave it in your room? I guess not. And after they leave, a strange symbol appears on it, which is obviously going to be a problem somehow. And after the opening credits, we're back in the art class with Data and Troy. How many children's art classes is Data taking part in? Is this Data Madison or some shit? What the hell is going on here? And how many of these classes does Troy observe? Is she the actual art teacher? Who the fuck knows? And now, Data has sculpted a weird mask, and Troy is impressed. Data says he used his imagination, and the image of the mask just came to him. Troy notices the symbol on the sculpture, and she asks Data if he was in her room, because someone left something for her with a similar symbol on it. Data says no, and then the kid who made the Dick Bird monstrosity is now having trouble with his computer terminal. More weird glyphs are appearing on it. This kid is grounded. There's no question about it. First, he makes a horrific sculpture, offensive. And now he's downloaded some kind of fucked up cryptogram virus from LimeWire. I'm guessing he tried to get a picture of a real-life Dick Bird as a frame of reference for his horrendous sculpture. But what actually happened is some alien information has been uploaded into the Enterprise's computer. They trace it back to the comet, of course, and they decide to melt down its outer shell with phasers to get a closer look at its core. So they hit it with phasers, the surface melts away, and it reveals, well, something. It's some kind of man-made structure. I don't know. And it's apparently more than 87 million years old, which is older than the comet itself. And someone asks, why would someone hide this inside of a comet? It's a great question, and we're really not going to get the answer. And it's continuing to transmit information to the Enterprise, and it's apparently some kind of alien archive. And Data thinks he may inadvertently be communicating with it, so he wants Geordi to run a diagnostic on him. And this is kind of hilarious, because Data has been acting pretty weird this entire time, but no one has questioned it. Usually when Data acts weird, bad shit happens. But the crew is completely fine with it, to the point where Data has to be the one to be like, hey guys, I'm weird right now. Could you maybe have a look at my brain? Like, why does he have to be the one to say, hey, I'm a little fucked up? It makes no sense. And in the meantime, the crew speculates that this thing was designed to upload a sort of information dump to anyone who comes along, as a way of documenting their existence and preserving their culture. At first, it seems a little bit like the extinct race from the inner light, but instead of focusing the experience on an individual, it's focusing on the Enterprise computer. But it's more sinister than that, as we'll soon see. And Picard orders that they are to sever the connection at the first sign of danger. I mean, why don't we just sever the connection now? I didn't even know that was an option. I know they're here to seek out new life and new civilizations, but why? Where's your gut instincts, is what I'm saying. When has something like this not been a bad time for everyone? Let's just shut it down and go have a nice bouillabaisse or something. That would be a better episode. But of course, they're not going to do that. Even after more of this weird shit starts appearing all over the ship, Picard believes that these are artifacts and that they played a ritualistic role in whatever this society was. So, while Captain Picard does his archaeology bullshit, Geordi runs that diagnostic on Data, and Data starts acting strangely, even more strangely than he has been acting. He says he's experiencing a curious sensation, and the word sensation is an interesting choice for Data. He then says something really ominous and kind of scary. He asks Geordi, what it feels like when a person is losing his mind, which is kind of a funny thing to ask Geordi, as if Geordi would know. I mean, I know Geordi is nuts when it comes to dating, but he's not full-blown nuts. And then suddenly there's some kind of weird growth on Data's head, just on top of the opening to his positronic brain. And he turns to face Geordi, and now he has a weird symbol on his head and another one on his chest. He's acting very different. He says, "Misaka is waking," in a very bizarre voice. And get used to hearing that, because Data is going to say weird shit for the remainder of the episode. And Geordi calls the captain, as you would. I mean, if you can't bother the captain over some wacky shit like this, when can you? And he heads to engineering. And Data is sitting on the warp core like a demented gargoyle. And he says he's not Data. His name is Ihat. And he doesn't know or care where Data went. And he says he comes from Misaka's city. And then he walks very briskly over to the engineering console and he lays on it like Rose in Titanic. "Draw me like one of your French droids, Captain." And Picard asks about Misaka. Ihat says knowing her is to understand pain and death. And then he turns to leave and sees Troy. And he thinks that she is Misaka. He's obviously terrified, and suddenly the symbol on his chest changes into some kind of sideways vagina with lines going through it. I don't know. As we learned from the Dick Bird, don't bother giving me a Rorschach test, okay? It's always going to be something fucked. And a new personality shows up. And once again, get used to that. It's all that's going to happen for the remainder of the episode. And they decide to confine Data to quarters until they can figure out what the hell's the matter with him. You know, they could just deactivate Data. But they don't even so much as float that as an option. And Geordi says the Alien Archive, or library, is using Data to create different people from its culture.
Well, no shit.
And Troy says that Data has the android equivalent of multiple personalities.
No shit.
And more personalities will likely emerge. So Picard goes to talk to Ihat again, and he describes Misaka as a queen and a lazy creature who spends most of her time sleeping. And Picard says then we should try to keep her asleep. And Ihat laughs and says, "Trying to keep the sun from climbing the sky?" And Picard seems to think that's a figure of speech. But Ihat is being quite literal when he says that. I don't know why it takes the crew so long to figure this out. I know it's difficult to pay attention to the overall banality of this episode, but if you are paying attention, there are actually a lot of hints as to what Misaka actually is. And Ihat goes on to say that only Corgano can put Misaka to sleep. And then once again, the symbol on Data's chest changes and another personality shows itself. It's someone who is absolutely petrified of Misaka. And then suddenly the Enterprise is hit with some kind of energy beam from the archive. And just before a dramatic fade out, Ihat returns to say that Misaka is awake. Ooh, I'm shaking in my standard issue Starfleet boots. And Worf and a security team respond to an emergency in 10 Forward, where a bunch of weird shit has appeared. There's more symbols and some plants and some artifacts. And Picard thinks that the sun is the symbol for Misaka. And he's on the right track, of course, but he still thinks of Misaka as a person, a queen, just as Ihat said. And the ship is being transformed, which is kind of incredible. I mean, how is this happening? This ancient civilization somehow managed to create a technology that could alter the molecular structure of any object and change it into something else entirely. It's basically an 87 million year old replicator on steroids. And it was apparently made by people who think the sun is a person. I don't get it. But moving on. Picard reluctantly says they have to destroy the archive, but the weapons are now inoperable. Seems like they might have waited a little too long to do this, which is unfortunate. I feel like Kirk or Sisko would have blown this thing to smithereens a long time ago, but Picard often yields to his archaeological curiosities. But despite the weapons not functioning, Worf thinks they can reconfigure a photon torpedo for a manual launch, which is how they did it in the old days. So Worf and Geordi begin working on the torpedo in engineering, which is bizarre. They took a torpedo from the torpedo room and brought it to engineering. Okay, whatever. But when they open the torpedo to examine its components, they find a bunch of snakes inside of it.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
And the entire deck seems to be transforming. Geordi and Worf try to leave, but a fire is blocking their path, and they need to be beamed out. It's kind of lucky that the transporter is still working after all these transformations, but thankfully, they make it out safely. Although, there is still a raging fire on that deck, but I guess we're just going to not worry about that. And they say that the archive has transformed about 20% of the ship. That seems like a lot. The Enterprise is big. 20% of it is a pretty huge chunk. And I don't really understand how anything is still functioning on the ship. You know, if I transformed 20% of my laptop right now into a fucking bed of succulents and cacti with snakes wiggling around on the hard drive, I'm willing to bet the entire laptop would stop functioning. Anyway, the senior staff is on the bridge. No idea where the rest of the crew is. It's just the main characters here. I guess everyone is just hanging out in their quarters, playing with their new shrubberies. And Picard says that the answer lies with Masaka, which shouldn't exactly be a revelation, but they're talking as though it is. And he wants to talk directly to Masaka. He goes to see Data again. This time his persona seems to be that of an elderly man trying to stay warm. And Picard talks about Masaka, and the old man says that Masaka is his daughter, and only Corgano can talk to her. And suddenly Ehot reemerges, and he says that Masaka chopped her father up and used his bones to make the world. It's odd that he says that because the dude was just here. I mean, if Masaka and her father are part of this culture's mythology, and that mythology says that Masaka's father is dead, then why was he just here? And Ehot goes on to say that in order to draw Masaka out, they have to build her temple. And he warns Picard that Masaka has a terrible rage. She lets people die of thirst or burns them alive. I mean, he couldn't possibly be spelling it out any more than he actually is right now. And in mid-conversation with Ehot, Masaka apparently finds him, whatever that means. So he's gone. And Masaka's father once again shows up, and he gives Picard the symbol needed to contact Masaka. And it's kind of funny because Ehot said that Picard would never be able to get the symbol for Masaka from her father. And it literally a minute later, he gave it to him. It really seems like it was no trouble at all. And now the bridge has been transformed into some kind of cheap version of Stonehenge. I'm half expecting Spinal Tap to play a concert here. And Geordi found the archive's transformation program. And if he puts in Masaka's symbol, it will create her temple. I don't know how they know that. I don't know how any of this works. None of it makes sense. And they admit that it's kind of a risk because they don't know what's going to happen either. I mean, it could turn the ship into something else entirely for all they know. But Picard says that Ehot and the old man risked their lives to give him this symbol. And Masaka killed Ehot for it, which is absolutely mind-numbing to me because they're talking about Ehot like he's a real fucking guy. He's not. He's some kind of ancient, warped personality in Data's brain. But they're talking about him like they owe him for this. If he was real, he's been dead for millions of years. So they put in this goofy symbol, and the whole deck transforms into Masaka's temple. But there's no one there. And as they explore it, they find the symbol for Masaka, along with another one that looks sort of like a horn. And Picard thinks that this is the symbol for Corgano. And in Data's quarters, Masaka takes over Data's body and puts on the mask that he sculpted earlier, which has apparently been painted since then. And finally, at long last, Picard has figured out that Masaka is actually the sun, and Corgano is the moon. It's a miracle. And suddenly Masaka shows up on her throne, but she won't listen to Picard, and she tells him to leave. Tragic. On the bridge, Geordi uses the archive to create a Corgano mask to counter Masaka. So it's basically like an RPG video game where you need a certain item to pass a speech check. And it works. Picard says he's going to pose as Corgano and convince Masaka to leave. He believes it will work, and I laughed when he said this because, quote, he studied similar cultures and thinks he can just improvise. I mean, okay. First of all, how does he know that they're similar? They don't know anything about these people, really. And if he studied similar cultures, I don't know why it took him so long to figure out that he's dealing with a culture's perception of a sun. So Picard approaches Masaka looking like he's ready to take part in the world's lamest eyes wide shut orgy. And they talk briefly, and he eventually convinces Masaka that she is tired and should go to sleep. So she does. And Data and the ship abruptly return to normal. Geordi disables the alien transformation program, and Starfleet says it will dispatch an archaeology team to study the archive. Archaeologists are going to study this. Why not engineers? I mean, think what they can do with this technology. It can transform anything into anything. I mean, it's basically the power of the Q. And Picard and Data talk in the ready room, and Picard says that Data has had an experience that transcends the human condition. He's been an entire civilization. Even though Data even admits that he doesn't really remember it. So I don't know why that's an experience worth noting if he doesn't remember it, but whatever. The episode ends mercifully. Overall, not good. I mean, it's just so hard to get past the problem of this civilization being so advanced that they have the ability to create this molecular altering archive for their entire race, and yet they're primitive enough to still think the sun is a deity. You know, it just doesn't make sense on any level. And there's a lot of repetitive dialogue throughout, and ultimately it makes you wonder what the fuck the point of it was. There's a mystery throughout the episode, but the answers are really handed to the crew. And it really doesn't feel like they start to piece them together until about the last 5 or 10 minutes. But despite that, it's a memorable episode because of how ridiculous it is. I mean, the images of Data and Picard wearing these goofy masks have become kind of internet comedy gold. But the episode as a whole is kind of boring and doesn't make any sense. And Season 7, unfortunately, is kind of like that. There are some really good episodes in Season 7. Parallels is, I think, one of the best Star Trek episodes of all time. The Pegasus, Homeward is really good. Firstborn, there's a lot of good Worf episodes in Season 7. And of course, all good things. But for the most part, Season 7 feels like they're just gearing up for the movies and they just want to get done with the show. You know, for every good episode, there's an episode like Masks or Genesis or Eye of the Beholder. It's a very mixed bag season. Just my opinion, of course. And this episode was written by Joe Menosky, who is a legendary Star Trek writer. He wrote tons of Star Trek episodes for every Star Trek show in this era. But I have to think that even he would agree that this is not his best work. And there's plenty of weird nonsense stuff in this episode that I didn't even mention because they're just too much. And I'm trying to be a little bit more conservative with the length of my videos. So if you have an observation about this episode that I didn't make, please leave a comment and let me know what you thought of this episode overall. But that's about all I got for now. So until next time, take it easy.
Let the hunt begin again. I am eager for that.